It's recording.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, for inviting me here. It's absolute privilege to be talking to you, and yeah, so thank you very much. So I thought before I start, maybe I quickly went and grabbed my books for those of you who maybe haven't seen it. I thought I'll just quickly pop them up. That's the cover. For those of you who haven't seen it, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, and that's really the reason that I've been invited here, is to talk about this new book of mine, which difficult. I've been wondering where to start, and I said to Diane, is she going to ask me questions, or am I going to just chat? So I'm going to just chat, but I really hope that you stop me at any point and really have this as sort of as a discussion rather than a presentation of sorts. I'm lecturing at the moment, and I've got to try and switch between that sort of lecturing stance and that kind of very informal chat, which is what I want to rather have here. So what I thought I'd do is really just chat about the book that I've just published, that's been published on Sarah. And perhaps for those who don't know, and this has been something for me that's been interesting actually, is from the Jewish perspective. First of all, I have to first explain that I feel very much like a diluted Jew. David, you'll understand that. My father is not Jewish, and though I was raised in a lovely mixed family, I feel like my Jewish identity is scattered, for want of a better word. And having written this book about Sarah, my great aunt, has really sort of brought me within the fold of Judaism and the kind of concerns of being Jewish. And of course, identity is something that we all look for. We all want to kind of know where we are and where we're from. So the book for me has been interesting from various points of view, in discovering sort of, the richness of Judaism, number one, and also the idea of culture in South Africa as a Jew. And that's why for me, and it seems to be, and it's certainly what has come out in the press about, the sort of level of interest of the book has been on various fronts. And I suppose there, when I could explain it as being, there's an Afrikaans identity. So wait, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me first explain what the book is about, because I'm assuming that most haven't read about the book or haven't perhaps even heard of the book. So the book, Searching for Sarah, was my search for Sarah Goldblatt, who was the sister of my grandfather, Israel Goldblatt, my mother's father. So my maternal grandfather. And Sarah was Israel Goldblatt's oldest sister. There were 4 siblings. And the rumors that I had heard as a child, not many of them, but there was always an intrigue and a mystery around Sarah, and particularly in relation to her connection and her relationship with C.J. Langenhoven. And my interest, as you go through life, you only get to a certain point in your life when things become clearer, or things, there's an importance attached to certain things. And for me, this whole writing journey of mine has certainly been about investigating family. I find family and background and genetics and genealogy fascinating. It often puts your identity into perspective. So for me, the whole writing journey has been an interesting one. But from the perspective of Sarah, it had always been known to me that there was a connection between Sarah and the great C.J. Langenhoven. And I'm sure I don't have to mention who C.J. Langenhoven was, but for the layperson, he was most well known for the writing of Die Stem. But in fact, he was a prolific writer, a parliamentarian, a politician. He wrote limericks. He had an incredible mind. Even some of the writings that I found in English, I found his writing and his thinking fascinating. So he's a fascinating character to start off with. And then, of course, I knew that there was an association with Sarah. So it was actually during the research of my second memoir, which was devoted to the theme of woman and work. And it also goes to my background of having been a lawyer and then kind of finding myself with 4 children, which we know doesn't happen automatically. There is some sort of a commission in that act. But with 4 children and a sort of flagging legal career, I always wondered how I was going to sort of navigate my path in life. So that's been my theme of writing, is women and work. And in writing my second memoir, I came across a book that my mum had given me, which was written by David Goldblatt. And David Goldblatt was my great-grandfather, so Israel's father. And he was a prolific Yiddish proponent and had quite a lot of influence in South Africa in terms of trying to get Yiddish recognized as a language of instruction, or rather as a language of, as a recognized language, a European language. So with Jewish immigrants in the early 20s, he had quite a significant role to play. In fact, even prior to that, the early 1900s. So it was during that search that I was looking at David, and I suddenly thought, gosh, I wonder if there's something on Sarah. And I sort of logged on to Wikipedia, and of course there came up a little excerpt of Sarah, and that sort of prompted my interest. So I finished the memoir that I was writing, but Sarah was always at the back of my mind. I published that memoir in 2018, but in the background, Sarah and her connection with Langenhoven and what happened, why was it so important, and why was there such a mystery behind it? That was really the theme of what I wanted to explore. And so that was really the sort of catalyst for my deciding to write on Sarah. I don't know why my screen is, there we go, change view. Okay. So that was really the idea behind Sarah, was to try and understand, first of all, sort of predominantly or primarily, was what was the connection with Langenhoven. And then obviously through that, one gets a glimpse of her own life and what she stood for and why she, what her life was all about. So I took a chance. I went off to Stellenbosch University one morning, as one does. You just decide this is the day I'm going to go and just have a look at the library, and off I go to the Stellenbosch library, and I walk into the library, and I see a whole lot of computers, and I sit down and I say, I'm coming to do some research. I don't tell anyone what it is, but they sort of let me in as a guest lecturer, as a guest, researcher. And I sit down and I look up Langenhoven, and then I see that there's a special collection section, and I walk into the library and I say sort of quite sheepishly to the librarians, I've come to see if you have anything on Sarah Goldblatt. Well, of course, that to me was the first revelation, because both librarians looked at each other as if, oh gosh, hier komt die Jood, and it sort of looked at each other knowingly, and immediately went to the leather-bound, huge, thick leather-bound catalogue of Sarah's documents, and then showed me the enormous expanse of information that existed within the Stellenbosch Special Collections Library. And that's really where I started. So it was quite intriguing to me. They went straight to a box. They lifted out the folder of one of the many boxes, my particular folder that said Rocky and Nikki. My sister Roxanne was always called Rocky, and I was called Nikki, and I still am by my family. And they pulled out a letter that Sarah had written to us in 1974. Sorry, that we had written to Sarah in 1974, a little letter thanking her for the 10 Rand that she had sent us. It was our birthday or something, and she'd sent us 10 Rand, and we had to write a letter, obviously from instruction from Mom, please write to your Aunt Sarah and thank her for the money, the 10 Rand. So that was the start, and I was absolutely fascinated that here Sarah's life was documented in such detail and so thoroughly catalogued in the Stellenbosch Library. So that was, I'm trying to think, I think at the end of 2017. At the end of 2017, and that began my search. So I realized that there was a whole story, and obviously, I was busy with various other things, and in fact, I was finishing off my other memoir, but as mentioned, this was always at the back of my mind, and the more I sort of delved into it and thought about it, I thought this is an important story to tell. And so from it, I think from the Jewish point of view, perhaps that's what, I'm here for. I was intrigued that, first of all, I have to say that I'm not very much part of the Jewish community, and it's a sadness for me in a sense, and it's an ambivalence for me. But what was interesting for me also is going to the Jewish Museum and into the library there, and I spoke to the librarians there, and I said, had they heard of Sarah Goldblatt? And neither of them had heard of her. So, from that initial stance, it was clear that she was very much part of the Afrikaans community and not so much of the Jewish community. So that in itself, raised a whole lot of questions about the nature of her Judaism and of my Judaism, actually, as being a family member of hers. And of course, there's another whole story there about the relationship between Afrikaners and Jews. And I met with many, many fascinating people in my journey of discovery. I had a wonderful meeting with Herman Gilliam, who is I'm sure he's the absolute expert on the Afrikaners. And he kind of encouraged me, and he said, I must write this book, and it's an important book. And she was well revered within the Afrikaners, and we spoke about the affiliation of the Afrikaners and the Jews, and of course that's been documented. I met with Milton Shane, which was an absolute treat and a privilege to meet with him and have the time with him to talk about it as well, and he was extremely encouraging about it. So it seemed like something that was necessary to pursue, and I sort of went about it, and that's really my journey of discovery of Sarah. I was then very fortunate, then of course, I was quite intimidated by this whole subject, to be honest, because first of all the writing was in Afrikaans, which of course I can read, but it takes a little bit more time. So that was daunting for me. And then the other part that was a daunting part of the story was what I talk about in the book as being the Kannemeyer context. And the Kannemeyer context, for Kannemeyer, if that's an unfamiliar name, John Kannemeyer was probably the most prolific biographer of Afrikaans literary people. And he had written the most the Bible really on Langenhoven in his book called called Langenhoven 'n Lewe. So all the time I was very mindful of the fact that I was going to tell a different story about Sarah, but I had to kind of acknowledge what he had written about, because of course that was the starting point for me. I went straight to Langenhoven's book that he'd written, and that's where the impression was formed about what, not necessarily the Afrikaners, but what Kannemeyer thought of Sarah. And for me, it was a very disparaging tone, and it was quite an unpleasant tone, and it felt to me like it was only half of the story. So all of these factors combined into my absolute obsession to finding another version of Sarah. And I think that's what I've sort of come to realize, speaking to other people about the book, is that, it's this whole version of truth that we try and explore when we write about things, and whose version of truth is it? And of course, subsequent to the book being released in April, there was quite a lot of controversy amongst the Afrikaans literati, which I knew was going to happen. And it was quite a daunting kind of, to be at the receiving end of that was quite hard. But of course, this wasn't really known within the English literature community. And since then, since it's sort of come out into the English market, it's got a completely different view. But I think the Afrikaners were a little bit concerned about the fact that, first of all, Sarah occupied such an important part of Langenhoven's life. And I think the whole, perhaps I've read in too much, but I detect that there is still an abiding sense of anti-Semitism in some form. And of course that for me was quite clear. So what the book has done has for me is you know, it has made me sort of so much more aware of being Jewish in South Africa, and sort of how to, yeah, you know, just from an historical and a religious perspective, how to, I mean, it's taken me on a completely different journey from law, which can be quite dry and academic. And so I've been lucky that, you know, the book was then published in April, and yeah, and so since then it's been just about 4 months since it's been released, and I've had the most incredible meetings with people through the book. That's what's been also interesting for me, is having written the book, people have emailed me, and I've been you know, to talks and being given so many different perspectives of the book, which I could never have had in my research. You know, there comes a point where you've got to stop your research, and you've got to say, this is the end of the line for me. I can't, you know, I can't carry on this project indefinitely. And it felt like I'd spent enough time with it, and I really wanted it to come out. So I was lucky. I was so excited that NB Publishers, Tafelberg Publishers, took on the book. And you know, I was delighted that they said they'd publish it in both English and Afrikaans, because obviously it's a much wider readership and a different readership. So all in all, it's been a really fascinating journey for me, and that's kind of my story. I feel like I've been gabbling on here for ages, and I don't know if there's any particular themes that you want me to discuss about the book, or obviously tell you a little bit more about the book, maybe get sort of specific questions on it, but really what the book is an understanding. It's sort of been classified as a memoir come biography, because I think biographies in themselves can be pretty dry. I've never written a biography. I've only written memoir. So for me, the style of writing was really in the way of my exploration and my search for Sarah, and how I found her. And of course, then the other side, and there are many, as I said, there are many levels to the story. You know, so it focuses primarily on her relationship with Langenhoven. And then, of course, the issue about the child, which I don't know if I want to even talk about anymore, but the point about the story was that I'd always heard that Langenhoven and Sarah had a child. And that is a part of the story that, as I say, once the book has been published, I've had various people come forward, and one of those is an interesting man. And I'm going to, if I get the time and the inclination and feel that it's worthy, going to continue on that path. Because a lot of people knew Sarah, you know, that I mentioned in the book, but subsequently people have said, oh, but we knew Sarah, or I knew of Sarah, and I know that there was a child. Or so the book doesn't come with any resolutions, but it offers a perspective on Sarah and the role that she played in Langenhoven's life, and sort of the sadness, I think, that was felt in the fact that she seemed to have ostracized her own family in a way, and sort of enveloped herself in the Langenhoven family. And so from a family perspective, because this is a family book, that's also been interesting, because, you know, when I speak to my own family, they didn't know anything about Sarah. And again, it's brought home the fact that we must ask people stories when they're still alive. I'm very aware of aging parents, and I want to know things, and I want to talk to them while they're still here, because I think those things are important. So I've learned so much from the book, and I'm going to just keep quiet now and see if there's something else that, I mean, I could talk on endlessly about various things, but I want to, if there's something in particular that you want to know about the book, or maybe I must give you a little bit more detail, then maybe this is the time for me to stop talking and perhaps get a question or so. I don't know, Diane?
Yeah. Are there anybody got questions for Dominique, or should she just continue to talk for a little while? Any special questions?
Can I raise something with you, Dominique?
Yes.
I've just finished reading your book, about a week ago, in fact, thanks to the Gipton Library's recommendation. So it did fascinate me, but I'm going to start what I'm going to call your beginning, which is talking about Judaism. And I'm very pleased that you used the word culture, because I really would like to put on the table, and I keep saying this, that being Jewish is not simply about a religion or nationalism or whatever that is. It's a cultural thing. I define myself as a food Jew. It's what you grew up with, part of the associations, and you aren't defined. I don't go to shul, so I'm a bad Jew. That does not come into my calculations. So you are very welcome wherever you feel comfortable to be. And that's your game to, and your contributions that you can make or not make. And what you've done now is an enormously valuable contribution in making us reassess how we look at things, and in fact, how you're looking at things. And when you talk about the Kanamere perspective, what bothered me about the book was you actually don't contextualize that. You do quote him, you did it, but I actually had to look up who this man is, what gives him an authority to talk as he does. And of course, it's from an Afrikaner point of view. And I think with someone in the 1930s, because you talk about the enormous contribution that Sarah made to Langenhoven's life, but I think he made an even greater contribution after his death in terms of promoting who he was and his work, and it becoming part of the school syllabus and millions of books. I've never heard of millions of books being published in South Africa. So I think that's quite extraordinary. So she made an enormous contribution, and particularly in the 30s, I wasn't quite sure how that would have gone down. Yes, this was a relationship between the Boer Youth and all of that, but in fact, the 30s, that was very much a time of rising anti-Semitism and the whole dynamic with the German situation, the grey shirts, etc. So I don't think it would have been very well accepted that a young Jewish girl, never mind other associations, I mean, I think it must be anathema, but a Jewish girl to suddenly be in charge of this thing, I don't think it could have gone down very well. So, but I wasn't sure where you were coming with and what, why Kanamere was so obsessively anti. Was it that background or his own background, which was part of it? And I think perhaps for people who haven't read it, maybe you need to mention a little bit more about that relationship, which started with her as a 20-year-old and him being his, how old is he then? In his 40s.
40 years. He was
and married and with a child.
Yes,
and
sorry, yes, indeed. That's a lovely question. Thank you for that, because you've directed me a little bit as to, an interest, a particular interest in it. So thank you for that. And it is, of course, a very important aspect of the story. So what's interesting for me is that one would have thought that, at the time it was quite obvious in the 1930s to have that feeling of anti-Semitism. It seemed more justifiable, for want of a better word. Of course, it's never justifiable, but it seemed as if it was almost to be expected with Jewish immigrants coming, etc. What has fascinated me, though, is to the response now that seems to, from the Afrikaner community, that seems to kind of entrench that feeling of anti-Semitism, that here was this woman, and of course it's a question of her recognition that she's been given by the Afrikaners, or anyone for that matter, for the role that she played. As you mentioned, she was appointed executrix of his estate, of his literary estate, when he died in 1932, and it was her work until 1975 that really was, that gave her, that was her contribution. But just going back, because you wanted me to mention Kanamere, the Kanamere context, I didn't know anything about John Kanamere, but I was aware of the fact that he was an icon. And John Kanamere in particular, he wrote the biography of J.M. Coetzee, he's written on Langenhoven, he's written several books. But I knew, and this is something that I'm thinking of exploring in the sequel, but there's a controversy about him as well. I don't know if you've been aware, there's a new review that has come out. It was reviewed on Fine Music Radio by Beverly Rose Miller. And she spoke, she knows that she knew John Kaname, and there's several people that have known about John Kaname. He died in 1995, just before the J.M. Coetzee biography was released. So he was by far the most well-recognized biographer of Afrikaans literary people. And here I came along as the Boere Hewitt Niggie, the niece of Sarah, and what contribution could I have made? Why was it my right to tell the story when I felt that he owned the story? He owned the right to tell the story because he was this renowned biographer. So that for me was, when you talk about the context, what was the Kaname context? I had to deal with that right at the beginning of the book and say, this is what I'm trying. So in a way, some people have said, well, is your book of Sarah a response to Kaname's book on Langenhoven? And that's the way in which some people, wanted to view it, is that it was almost like I was responding to the allegations that he made about Sarah, which of course he had to make because Sarah was so much part of Langenhoven. That was the phrase that was used so much to describe their relationship, is that Langenhoven didn't come without Sarah. They were absolutely intricately connected. So it would have been an impossible task for him to have tried to even write about Langenhoven and exclude Sarah. And that's why she is intricately woven into the biography, almost on every single page. So I had to then, so that was my first port of call. I had to go and read that biography and understand the tone that he was using. Then the question that you are asking is why? Why do you think there is this this disparaging or this dismissive tone that he uses? And I think, as you mentioned, why is this single young woman? So Sarah arrives in Oudtshoorn. She's in her early 20s, and he is 16 years older. He's 40 something, in his late 40s, and he is married to a widower, Leonie Magdalena, who has had her own children. She had 6 children. In fact, at the time, though, she had 4 children when Sarah entered the picture. And of course, that in itself in the 1930s is going to cause, a little bit of friction in terms of, well, what was the role that she was playing in his life? And then, of course, when Langenhoven dies in 1932 and she's appointed as the full executrix, the only literary executrix of his entire estate, one has to wonder, well, why? What was so important? I mean, it's, what was the significance of the relationship that he felt that he could entrust her with this entire literary legacy? And of course, then the whole side is, if you look at the media reports and the newspaper articles that came out after that, no one said anything. No one spoke about them. Every article, every newspaper said there was a silence. No one wanted to, Sarah never wanted to speak about their private lives. Langenhoven certainly didn't want to, even on his grave, on his tombstone, he had a specific instruction, do not dig into my past. So there's always been this mystery about the affair, for want of a better word, that they had, and of course that makes the story a little bit more intriguing. I hope that's answered your question, Philip.
Well, trying to find a reason is going to be a difficult one. Also, it's a very different time. I mean, you're talking about the 1930s. I mean, today, if a child is born out of wedlock, it's not the end of the world, perhaps. Things are very differently handled. There was a relationship that she had with the widow, which complicated things as well. There were so many things that were going on. And even if there'd been no relationship, but what you hadn't mentioned is actually they did also, Langenhoven and Sarah had a working relationship. She did work with him. And he obviously then understood her talents and her ability to be the executrix. So she got it not on the basis of her relationship with him, but on the basis of her knowledge of his work, and obviously his respect for her in that regard. So I think it was a perfectly sensible thing to do. but in terms of the dynamics of that era, and even, as you said, this era, tragic says, this foreign Jewish girl suddenly becoming an important aspect of Afrikaans literature, I think it is a bit strange.
Well,
and you
well, of
certainly
course.
delved into those strangenesses very well. I must compliment you on. You certainly got me thinking about all kinds of those awkward dynamics that still exist.
Yes, sorry. I mean, perhaps I've missed out a big part of it. For those who haven't read it, is obviously she was appointed on the basis of her skill and her love of Afrikaans, and her love of languages, and her absolute passion to keep the language alive. And that for me was, clearly that was the reason that she was entrusted with that enormous responsibility. What's interesting then, though, is one asks the question, why? Why was she so determined and so obsessive? Because she was not an easy woman. She was a difficult woman. She was an ambitious woman. But for me, then the backstory is also important. Why? What drives somebody to get involved in a language which is not yours by birth, and to go to the extreme lengths, the extraordinary lengths that she went to keep it alive? As you mentioned, in the publishing world, 2 million books is extraordinary. It's unheard of. So she really did dedicate her life for from the time that he died until the time that she died. And she was 86 at the time when she died, and right up until literally the year before. So 1973 was the centenary year, the 100 years celebration of when he had, of his birth, of Langenhoven's birth. And it was in that year that she went touring around the country from Oudtshoorn to all over the show, and literally stopped the world for Langenhoven so that people could recognize who this man was. And of course, I'm, again, it's a funny feeling for me because I didn't grow up with Langenhoven, but a lot of people have. People, slightly older than I am, and Afrikaans people said, "Oh no, but I've," just yesterday somebody sent me a message and said, "Oh, I've just finished your book and I loved it, and I grew up with Brolox and Bittergal." And I'm thinking, oh gosh, I still need to read that, because for most people, the Afrikaans literature was part of their life. So they understood the story and the significance of the story. And that's why it was so important that it come out in Afrikaans. And in fact, the publishers were worried about the English market. And I said, there has to be an English market. This is a Jewish woman. That's what's so important about the story. So yes, there are so many aspects of it, Philip, so many aspects of it. It's about the relationship, it's about the anti-Semitism, and as I say, it's inspired me to continue exploring issues of identity and history in South Africa, and the recognition of women as well. It's very much a woman's story, and women's stories are becoming more important. So it deals with many different themes. Yeah, Diane, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, so I just want to ask say two things. That the fact that you're talking about it during Women's Month is a great thing as well. But who translated the book into Afrikaans when you said your Afrikaans isn't that good?
Well, actually, that was the other really difficult task, is that I had to write the book. No one else was going to write it for me. And I sort of approached the publishers. In fact, I met with other publishers long before I'd even finished. I'd sort of written three chapters, and I've said, look, I've got this really interesting story. And they said, yes, it is very interesting. Now write that book in Afrikaans. So I said, no, I can't possibly write it in Afrikaans. It's bad enough just reading the Afrikaans. So how did I do it? I had to read everything in Afrikaans and write it in English, obviously, which was quite a challenge. So that took, as I said, more time than it would normally have taken. But once I had the English, then the translator got involved, and it was a woman, Elsa Silk, who I was fantastic, and she had she was also given a fairly short timeline in which to do the job of translating the book. So she then took the whole of the English book and translated it back into Afrikaans. Well, not back into Afrikaans, but into Afrikaans. And in doing so, she checked me on all the quotations that I'd used from Kaname. So it was a kind of a double translate, so that, and I was reassured of the fact that what I thought and the tone and the idioms and things that I'd used were correct, because obviously I was concerned about that. I thought maybe I've missed something here. So that was also sort of a comfort in the sense that that was her task. So she translated it she translated Afrikaans, but in doing so, I had to send her every single quote and document. And she was obviously quite familiar with Kaname, but then she would have to read it herself. And I sent her all the original letters. And of course, the Afrikaans was also different then to as it is today. The usage of yay as J-A-Y rather than J-Y, sorry, Y-I-J rather, or whatever. So there were a whole lot of those sorts of things. But yes, that was a challenge. It was a challenge to read.
Yeah. Anybody have questions for Dominique?
I just want to mention that growing up in Windhoek in the southwest, as you might recall, and certainly your mom, we never had or never felt any real antipathy from any section of the community. Nobody ever judged you as to whether you were English, German, Afrikaans. We were just were you a good person, and you were then accepted. And so it's strange when I hear you talk about the sort of anti-Semitism aspect. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, your dad's father, David, was he a religious person? Because I remember distinctly your dad.
Sorry, David, I'm going to stop you. It's Mum's grandfather. This is nothing to do with my dad's side. So this is my mum's grandfather. So Israel's father, David.
Yes. Now, David,
yes.
He was religious.
Well, he was not. It seems as if he wasn't as religious as interested in Yiddish. But yes, he was. He wrote 2 books. One was called "Is the Jewish?" Well, he was religious in the sense that yes, he grew up. Actually, his own father was a rabbi, so of course he was religious. But I haven't really explored his sort of background. But his interest was certainly more in linguistics and in the language of Yiddish. But his father was a rabbi, and he wrote 2 books. One called "Is the Jewish Race Pure?" in which he is quite controversial in terms of stipulating quite categorically that there's a superiority in the Jewish race, which is perhaps unfortunate. And in fact, when I spoke about it, somebody said, "Oh, do you want to even put that out?" I said, "Well, that's the truth. I try and tell the truth as much as possible." And he wrote another one, which I can't recall, which Mum actually still has. And I've been saying to her, "Mom, please, can I have that one?" But it's interesting you say about the anti-Semitism. And I can't say, yes, in Windhoek, I didn't feel it. I was only 7 when I left Windhoek, so I lived in Johannesburg. I felt anti-Semitism growing up as a teen in Johannesburg because I was at an ordinary school, a government school. I was the only Jew in my class. I had some anti-Semitic comments. I was never really in the fold of Judaism. I didn't go to a King David. But, it didn't really concern me that much. And I think also in Oudtshoorn, remember, this story takes place in Oudtshoorn, that must also be said, which of course was the little Jerusalem of South Africa at the time, because the influx of, so many Jews arrived in Oudtshoorn. So it was there itself, that's another, I want to go back to Oudtshoorn now. I've been once or twice to go and look at what's there, but the feather industry, it's a fascinating town. It's very sad at the moment. I mean, the whole industry has collapsed, or did collapse then, and with tourism now, even more sad. But there's so much literature on the Jews in Oudtshoorn as well, and
they had 2 shuls at one stage.
Yes, well, I've also met people that live, I need to go, as I say, there's so much to explore still. I need to go back and talk to the Jewish people from Oudtshoorn. There was a very strong community of Jews in Oudtshoorn. So perhaps anti-Semitism wasn't as pronounced there. Certainly not as, as Windhoek. Yeah.
Sorry. Just a quick, light-hearted, you always say you have two shuls, one that you don't go to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Is there
Anna,
anyone?
you're on mute. You must unmute yourself.
Sorry, Dominique. I was saying
Yes.
it seems that you've got plenty of opportunity to go and research elsewhere, and so there is the possibility of yet another book at another stage.
Oh, absolutely, Diana. I mean, I'm working on several books at the time. I've got to decide which one is the most important, but I love it. I think I love researching. The researching is the easy part. The writing is harder. But I really do feel that the story is worth pursuing, on various levels. But I have an interest, and I need to explore the whole Jewish side as well. Yeah, so there's lots of things to do. But at the moment I'm also wanting to write another memoir. So on sort of women and work and lawyers. So I've always been inspired by my mum. She's been quite instrumental in my life, and she's got a strong Jewish, the whole Jewish background. And my grandfather was, he went and lived in Israel. So there's a strong Jewish connection, which I haven't really identified with in many ways. So there's lots more to explore. Yeah.
Well, we look forward to it, and we've recently done a survey with our members on Google Docs, asking them what Zooms they've enjoyed and because since lockdown, we've had to sort of reinvent ourselves. We have 4 branches in Cape Town and with our own centers, and normally people meet at the centers, but obviously with lockdown, everybody's at home. And at the beginning of lockdown, none of them ever did Zoom. So we've taught a lot of our members to go onto Zoom, and we now have a different subject at least every day, and sometimes twice a day, or right through the week. So we decided a couple of weeks ago to send out a Google Docs questionnaire to say, what did people really enjoy? What haven't they enjoyed? What would they like us to add to the program? And one of the sort of, we've added up the answers and got right from, say, 40 down to 7 of what's popular and what's not popular. And one of the more popular was a book club. So we're looking at ways of doing a book club, and probably after Rosh Hashanah, because to start something in the next 2 weeks is not going to work. But that is something that's on the card, if we can find a slot to slot it in. But I think that might be a very good thing for us to put on the books or on the Zooms.
Yeah. Lovely. I'd love to be part of that, and I'd love to actually learn from the members in your book club. I think there's such a lovely support of books. Everyone's got different reading preferences, but I love that idea. I think that's a wonderful idea.
And I just also heard you mention someone in your family used to speak Yiddish.
This was Sarah's father.
Okay.
Sarah's
so
father. Yes.
Class every single week with beginners and intermediate. So if you're interested in coming on and learning a bit about it, it's every Friday morning at 10 o'clock.
That sounds fascinating. Wow, that's amazing. I mean, as a matter of interest, how widely is Yiddish still spoken?
Well, just give you a little example. Was last week we had our birthday celebration, because for the last 14 years we've had a Yiddish week every year at our seniors, and it's always been in person, and it's been a 3-day event, but obviously we couldn't do so. So we decided to have a birthday party last week, and we had 91 people from all over the world on the Zoom.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. How wonderful.
Yeah.
Of course, that movie, yes.
What I must also add is that Duolingo now has it as one of the languages you can do on Duolingo, which has I think it's now the 31st language that's been added. And since been added, which is some months ago, they've had 300,000 people logging into that language course. And that's, by the way, the language course attracts millions of people, and 80%, obviously, well, not obviously, but 80% one needs to know are getting onto Duolingo for English. But the other thing which is interesting about Yiddish, every language has a national flag. So obviously Italian has got the Italian flag, Germany the German flag. So they didn't know what to do for Yiddish because it's this place called Yiddishland. There isn't a place where it is, only the national language. So they took the Israeli flag, took out the Magen David, and put the Aleph in the center, and that's the flag for Yiddish.
That's wonderful, Philip. What a lovely, lovely thing. And I think I'm sure that you've heard of that, of the movies that have come out, Unorthodox. Fascinating.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things we do is on a Wednesday afternoon, we have a knitting club, and people Zoom in, and at the same time we have a movie. So they knit and have a movie, and we do a lot of Jewish orientated movies on a Wednesday afternoon. Shtizzle, Unorthodox, all those. Yeah.
Yes, lovely. I'd love to join you, so you can put me on your list. Perhaps one day I'll become a good Jew. A good Jew.
We're quite happy to put you on our database. A pleasure. And you can get our weekly Zoom lectures. They come out usually Thursday or Friday.
Yeah. Super. I'll try and join as often as I can, but that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Dominique, never mind what's on the things that you could Zoom into. You can also have a Shabbat supper.
Oh wow, that sounds even better. That sounds even better.
I knew you were a food Jew. I knew I could relate.
Okay, so that is a service that we've provided since lockdown as well.
Lovely.
So,
lovely.
We've got volunteers who deliver them. Yeah, so it's really great. Has anybody got anything that they'd like to either say to Dominique or ask her? Now's your chance. Oh, you're all taking a stump out of this morning.
Yeah, taking the wind out of the sails.
Okay, everybody. Just to say to Dominique, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We've enjoyed listening to your book, the story, and hope you have many sales. And we look forward to seeing you on our Zooms in the future. This afternoon is a concert, and I just want to see I can't remember what the concert is.
In the chat, Diana. Carly Simon. It's in the chat, and it's Carly Simon. It's in the chat.
Okay, so it's Carly Simon. It's fabulous. David and I actually had a concert on Friday night. We sat and we watched it to see what it was like. And it's a beautiful concert. For those of you who know and love Carly Simon, really worth watching. So we'll see you at 2:00 this afternoon, and then Yiddish tomorrow at 10.
Thank you, Diana. I just want to say thank you so much. It's really been lovely to be in a different forum, different people, meeting different people. And David, I just want to say I have fond visions of you sitting in the Sam Cohen Hall in Windhoek with Ruth, playing your guitar. Is it singing? And your guitar. I must have been about 5 years old at the time. So
he still sings at Yiddish sometimes in the Yiddish mornings. So it's worth listening to. Yeah.
Lovely. Super.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. All the best.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Diana, you can end the recording.
Yeah, thank you.